everyone. All right, so I have a fairly long March wrap-up, but I've talked about a number of these books individually, and there was a section I really wasn't into, so I think even though I didn't do like a mid-month wrap-up, I think we'll be okay. I don't feel like I'm going to talk about too many books, so I kind of structured this a little differently. Rather than going in like the order I read them, I just kind of went with books I've already talked about, and then things I don't really have a ton to say that I just didn't like, and then we'll get into like the stuff I actually enjoyed and go into more detail. All right, so the first one is a reread, and I also did this as part of the banned book challenge, and this is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. I'm doing the monthly read along with the Bookish Drummer Discord, and we'll see if I can fit April in with the readathon and everything, but worst case I can do Chamber of Secrets in May along with Prisoner of Azkaban. But yeah, so I reread this, and I've obviously read it. I think I've read it 5 times at this point beforehand, so not a ton to say. It's Harry Potter. I mean, J.K. Rowling aside, I still love, like, the Harry Potter series. I really enjoyed them, when I was younger. And when I was younger, I was still reading them. Like, by the time they came out, I was in college. I was late in college. And so, it's like I wasn't a kid. But, I read them all. And I do like the series. So it was a reread. Not a whole lot to say beyond the fact that I still like Harry Potter. And it's still fun. Then I read 15 by Beverly Cleary because I got confused and I thought it was banned, or maybe it was and I just couldn't find it again, which I hadn't read before and was really cute. And then I reread Forever by Judy Blume, which was the banned book, and I did a whole video on the 2 of these, kind of comparing them, talking about, first love stories. So I'm not going to go into a ton of detail, but so you can watch that video if you really, really want to learn about those books. And then for the last of the banned book challenge for the month, I did The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. Really great book. Really liked it. Again, made a whole video on this one. So then I had one DNF, which was These Violent Delights. It opens with this crime against this one guy, and to be honest, as the book continued, the only character I cared about was the person who was murdered in the prologue. I think it was trying too hard to be like dark academia, kind of dark, make these unlikable characters, but they were just generally unlikable, and I didn't really like the writing style, so I just kind of gave up on it, honestly. I kind of skimmed through towards the end in the second half to see if anything would change, because that does happen from time to time, but I just really couldn't get into the writing, which is really too bad, because the cover's good and the concept is good, but it just didn't work for me. So I read And I Darken, which was on my 24 to read for 2024, and I don't have a whole lot to say about this. It was fine, but I read some reviews as I was reading it, and I was kind of like, I don't know about retelling Dracula's story. And I think, the problem is when you're dealing with a real person, especially someone who has significant historical context for certain cultures, I don't really feel like maybe you should be writing a book about a historical figure that you don't have a personal connection to, and without an extensive amount of research, just because, there are people obviously who are very attached to this part of their history, and so I feel like Eastern European people are kind of like, do you have any ties to this culture? And so the whole time I just kind of was like, I feel like I wish this had just been a fantasy and it had not tried to draw on the Dracula story, because you're taking real people and then twisting it, and it doesn't necessarily work. And then you start running into some issues where, the portrayal of Islam, and I don't know, the whole thing, I think she should have just stuck with a fantasy. I mean, the writing's fine, but I just think it's too sensitive. Even though it's like hundreds of years ago, I understand, that Vlad Dracul is not like recently or anything, but I just think that to me, it's weird. If you're going to pull from actual people, I mean, just do what like George R. R. Martin did and take like the concept of the War of the Roses and then make it fantasy. Like, there's no need to pretend that you're actually writing a story about a real person. And then I read Dark Matter, which was also on my 24 for 24, because everyone loves this book, and I hated it. I absolutely hated it. I didn't like the character. I didn't like the writing. I thought it was, like, written, like, Dan Brown writing, like, where it's, like, very, very bad as far as the writing. So I can see that it's, like, compelling and fast-paced and can be a page-turner if you care or if you find the story. But I also felt like this has been done a million times, and I don't understand why it was, like, everyone's like, oh, it's so unique. Like, really? Like, I feel like I've seen this a million times in, like, a ton of, like, sci-fi. So, I don't know. I didn't like it. I have no interest in reading other books of his. But, again, that's the thing about books you don't like. Like, I didn't like it, and I kind of have this, like, there's been a lot of conversations lately, is like, booktube toxic, is this toxic? And one of the things I was like, I feel like the internet is toxic, and part of that, it just comes from people who, like, seem to have been, like, out sick on the day they learned the difference between, like, opinion and fact. And so, like, it's my opinion. I did not like this book. I mean, it's factual in the fact that I didn't like it, but I'm not saying, like, it's an opinion if I think it's a bad book. Like, if you like it, I'm not judging you. I'm not saying you're a bad person. You're an idiot. I don't like your opinion. Like, none of that. This is just my opinion. I'm not, like, again, and I mean, I've said a couple times, like, I have found books, there are certain people that I know, even friends, and I'm not talking about, like, people I don't like. Like, I have friends that I'm close to that have terrible taste in certain things, whether it's, like, books or movies and as much as I love them as friends, like, I actually really like when they tell me about a book or a movie or something that they really like, because I'm like, okay, not seeing it because they liked it, or maybe I'll see it, but, like, expect less. Or if they hate something, I'll often go and, like, track it down because I'm like, oh, okay, I generally have the complete opposite opinion of them. So I think there's benefit in, you find, like, what you align with people, and you can align on some, maybe there's, like, somebody it's like, oh, I really like their opinions on, like, mystery, but I don't like their fantasy opinions, and so, again, like, I know people love this book, and I'm not saying that there's, like, anything wrong with liking this book. I just wasn't impressed, and I was, like, kind of disappointed because I was like, I don't get what the hype is. But again, going into another one, I don't get the hype. Listen for the Lie. This book was so hyped up. It's all over the place. It has super high ratings on Goodreads, and I think she writes YA, usually, and I feel like it definitely read as YA, but it wasn't about YA characters. So you have these, like, characters who are adults who are behaving like they're 14-year-olds. And this book was, like, more about this girl who just wanted to bang every guy she was talking to, even though she'd, like, dealt with all this trauma and stuff. And, like, the whole book is her just, like, hooking up with random people and being, like, attracted to everybody. And she was, like, snarky, but not in, like, a fun way. Like, it was very grating to me. And I was just kind of, like, I don't know why this girl is so horny, but, like, it's just not my thing. Like, I don't know. I mean, some people like it. Again, you relate to her. Like, it's just not my experience. Like, I don't know. I did not like this book. I felt like it was, like, the mystery was, like, pretty obvious, and then the characters just, I really disliked. Moving into another one. So, I read The Engagement Party, and this one is, like, kind of this is, like, the perfect, like, mid-level book. And this is why, like, I think it gets confusing with, like, star ratings and stuff, and I have started rating. I used to not rate, but then that just got confusing. And then I started reading like a lot of books I really, really didn't like, and I was like, okay, that's it. I'm just going to be honest. But this is like a very mid-level book. Like, I read it really fast. This is the engagement party. It was fast. It was fun. But like at the end of it, it was kind of like dumb, and I was just like, I guess this is to me the equivalent of like a really bad, cheesy horror movie. Not like a bad one that's like so bad that it's like either funny or so bad it's intolerable, but just like a very generic like horror movie, or like even like a mediocre comedy that is fine when it's free on like a streaming service and you just stumble over to it and it's not necessarily great and it's not really memorable, but it like passes the time well. And so that's what this was. It was like a fun way to like, I enjoyed it while I was reading it, at least to the point where I was like interested in knowing what was going to come next. But then like if I thought about it for more than like 2 seconds, I was like, none of this makes sense. So I just was kind of like, it was fine. It was fine. Then I read The Gallopers by John Ransom, and I didn't like this book, but I can see why a lot of people would. And I am actually like, it's one of those books where like I didn't like it, but I would definitely read another book by this writer. I thought it was really well written. I just wasn't that intrigued by the actual story or the plot, and the characters were interesting and well developed, but just not people I could personally connect to. So I definitely think it's like a very well written book. It has like an interesting kind of literary style I like, and so I definitely want to check out more by this writer in the future. Just maybe a story that's more up my alley. And then I moved into another one that was kind of in like a high 3, low 4, which was Nothing But the Rain. This is about basically people who the rain washes away all their memories. And what's frustrating to me is I've been working for like years on this manuscript, and it's a very similar kind of concept. And I was just like, oh, I mean, again, I'm not saying it's like super unique or anything, but it just, another reason I should probably like get off my ass and start writing more. But I liked this. It's a very short novella. The problem with it is I feel like it was really short, and I either think it like needed to go in one direction, either needed to be shorter and just be a short story for like cool concept, or it needed to do more because like the ending just kind of felt like, is that it? So yeah, I can't really decide. Like, I liked it conceptually, and I thought the writing was good, but it was in the novella space, and I feel like it needed to, like I said, either be a short story or a full novel. Then I read The Kind Worth Saving. I really love Peter Swanson, but I'm not, like, that into this series. I feel like it's fine. Like, I don't really like it that much. I don't understand the obsession with, like, the characters. I find them kind of just, like, bland, but I know people really love this series, so it was good. I mean, it was fine, and I think the third one is coming out, so I'll probably read it because I've already read the first two, but I do really like Peter Swanson, so, like, this is not my favorite of his. So if you have read this series and you didn't like it, I've read other things of his I've really enjoyed, or if you do like it, again, I think he's a good writer. I do like him, but this series is just not my favorite of his. Then I read Flamer, which I didn't do a banned book thing on because I had already had like picked out my banned books for the year. And I had already done 3 videos this month. So I was like, okay, that's too much of the banned books. So I'm going to pause. So I did read this. This is really good. It's a graphic novel about a boy at like Boy Scout camp, kind of realizing he's gay, but like not really totally understanding. But it's also, I don't even know if it's Boy Scout. It might be like a Christian boys camp. But like, it's a good book, and it really does deal with like some of the like awkwardness of, I mean, it deals with how, like, obnoxious boys are, at that age. I think he's, like, 13 or 14. And I think it's interesting because, especially for me, like, I mean, as a girl, like, I don't know what, like, growing up as a boy is like, obviously. So, I thought that was kind of interesting. It was interesting because, like, I went to Girl Scout camp, so I kind of was like, some of the stuff was relatable, and some of it was, like, very boy stuff that I was like, okay, so off in the Girl Scout camp, this is what we were doing in this instead. But I thought, like, concepts were good. I think it was, I understand, like, people ban it because there's, like, some graphic talk, there's some graphic stuff, but, like, to be honest, like, for the age group, and it's not that graphic, and, I also think it's important, because if no one's going to talk to you about sexuality, like, you're going to have to learn about it one way or another, right? So, my only problem with this book is that, like, the character becomes suicidal, towards the end, and then he has, like, this vision of, like, I don't know, like an angel or something, and then he's like, I'm not going to kill myself because things will get better. And I think that's good, and I think it's actually good because, like, I don't think we should necessarily write books where we're like, hey, guess what? Life sucks, and it might not get better. I think it is nice to have kind of that hopeful thing for, like, middle grade and young adult. But I just, as somebody who, like, was suicidal my entire, like, adolescence and into, like, my life in general, and who's dealt with that a lot, I just sometimes I was like, I don't like that when books or movies or stories about, like, suicide kind of, like, it's fine, you're no longer suicidal, because, like, that hasn't been my experience. So I worry more about, like, I think it's important. I think we need to have that perspective. But for me, the reason I would give it a 4, not a 5, is because, like, I also think, you can't just be like, it's that quick or that easy. But again, that's a very personal thing. And I still feel like it's very, very important to have books that do provide that hope. So this is really good. I did like it. And then I read Aliens, which Sir Chunk had given me for our swap for the year. This is really great. Like, this is a novelization of the movie. And novelizations are usually, like, crap. And this was, like, very well done, very well written, really compelling. Had, like, the same level of, like, tension and action that the book had. I mean, the movie has. The thing is, like, the whole time, though, I was just like, I should just watch the movie again. So that was the only thing, is I was just like, why am I reading the book and not watching the movie? Because there is a movie. The movie was first, and the movie's really fun. And so, I liked it. But again, I was just like, do we need a book? But I guess, if you really wanted to read more, or you watch the movie a bunch of times and you want to read a book of it, it's a good book version. And then for some reason, it took me all month to read A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking, which is really fun, really cute, fantasy, T. Kingfisher. I loved it. I don't love it as much as some of her other stuff. You can tell it's, like, earlier in her writing, because I feel like a lot of the things she does well, she still does well in this, but it's, like, not as refined as some of her newer stuff. It's also written, I think, for middle grade, and so, or, like, very young adult, and she actually had, like, a note in the end, too, of, like, no one wanted to publish it because it was too dark, but not dark enough, and, like, and I totally get that, because, like, the publishing can be such a nightmare, especially when you're dealing with, like, middle grade and young adult, because, like, there's, like, people don't want to put a book out there for adult readers with a teenager or a middle grade protagonist, because then they're like, oh, adults don't want to read about kids, and then they're like, oh, but it's too dark for kids. So I don't know. That's a whole other conversation, but I didn't think it was that dark. I thought it was dark enough, and it was funny. It's a fantasy. There is, like, some violence. It's kind of like that, like, old school fantasy, though. Like, when, the stuff growing up in the 80s that I was watching and reading, like, cute and fun, but also, like, with actual stakes and violence, and people do die, and, like, so it's not, like, too cutesy, but it's also not, like, it's not Game of Thrones intense or anything. I would have, and I know, like, if I had read this at, like, 12, this would have probably been, like, my favorite book when I was that age. Like, I would have just absolutely loved this. The character's really cute. She's, like, you know, it has, like, concepts of, like, you know, the corruption of power. She just kind of wants to, like, bake. She doesn't really want to be, like, a wizard or a mage, you know, with helping the army. And, you know, so she has all these sort of, and then she questions kind of, like, adults and why they make bad decisions. And, but then she's also kind of badass, but she isn't, like, is reluctantly badass. And so it's just, it was fun. One thing I will give a ton of credit for is there's zero romance. So, like, she has a friend, he's a boy, he's about her age, and there's no, like, even, like, glint or, like, glimmer of romance between them. And that, thank God, you know, because I think that's so frustrating, is, like, everybody always has to, like, they meet one other person their age and suddenly they're all in love, and, like, I hate that. And so, so this was really fun, and, you know, I definitely recommend it. Like I said, I enjoyed it a lot. I loved it. I just feel like it would have been, like, my favorite book when I was younger. And then I read Murder in the Family, and this is kind of like Engagement Party, where, like, if I thought about it too much, it didn't necessarily hold up. But it's written as a, like, Netflix, like, well, it's not Netflix, but basically Netflix, true crime series, and it's written as, like, the transcript of the episodes. And so that was really fun for me, because I just liked the format and the way, because it's a mystery, but you're getting it, like, as if, like, you're watching a TV show. And so it was really fun. I liked the format. I liked the gimmick. The mystery was good. It wasn't, like, super hard to figure out, but I definitely thought it was interesting how there were all these, like, other pieces that kind of connected. And it was interesting. But again, I think at the end, I was like, if I had really sat and, like, thought about any of this, I'm not sure, you know, that there aren't plot holes. But what's nice is because it's, like, written as a transcript, it reads really fast. And so it's kind of like if you were binge watching a true crime show. You're not spending time thinking about it. You're just watching it and, like, moving on. And so I thought it was fun. It was a fun experience. So I had the arc of Lisa Gardner's third Frankie Elkin book, which is Still See You Everywhere. So I was like, okay, now I need to read this entire series. So I read the first, second, and third. So the first is Before She Disappeared. I really liked this book. In this one, so Frankie, basically, she goes and finds missing people. And in this one, it's a girl in Mattapan, which is part of Boston. You know, and part of it is that, like, from being from Massachusetts, like, I thought, you know, it was a very good portrayal of the area. Like, it felt authentic. The only thing is, like, I feel like Mattapan is, for, like, Boston, kind of, like, a more dangerous part of Boston. But, like, Boston is still one of, like, the most safe major cities in the world. And, you know, I was like, if you are not from the area, you might be like, wow, this is a super, super scary area. And it really isn't in, like, comparison. I mean, relatively, yes, like, for Boston, it is not necessarily the best part of the city, but it's not, it's, you know, it's not like other cities. Like, it's just a much safer city generally. But I did really like this book. I thought it was compelling. It's a slow burn. It's a little bit of a mystery, but it's also, like, there's a lot of really strong character development, and I really liked the characters, and I liked the people in the town. So I enjoyed this a lot. And then the second one was, like, completely different. This is One Step Too Far. In this one, she joins this group who's going into the wilderness, basically, to look for someone who was lost in the wilderness. And so this becomes more of, like, a survivalist story than a mystery. I mean, there is still the mystery element, and again, the characters are very well developed. And so one of the things she does really well is, like, there is, like, the mystery and there's the, the main plot of the missing person, but that becomes sort of secondary to just the people she meets along the way. And so just like the first one, I really, really liked all the characters and I liked how they were developed. It's very well written. I liked Before She Disappeared more just because I think I like a missing person in the city, more than I like a survivalist kind of wilderness, somebody who's been missing for years kind of thing, where they're essentially looking for a body more than, seeing if they can save the person. But I did like it. I think, again, very well written. And then the third one, I didn't like this one as much as the first two. This one is about basically a serial killer who wants to find her sister she was separated from years ago before she's executed. She's on death row, the serial killer. And she sends Frankie to this sort of tropical atoll off Hawaii where this tech billionaire is building, a resort or whatever. And so, again, similar where, like, a lot of it is just her meeting the people that are working there, and they're all sort of, like, kind of nomads, like, they just move around a lot, and this is just sort of temporary, and everyone's kind of likes their privacy. The problem with this one is that the mystery story, like the missing person story, I just didn't like it. Like, it was so minimal in terms of the book. Nothing even happens with it until like 60% of the way into the book. And then I felt like it was rushed. And then I also just felt like I didn't really care. And I didn't think the characters that she met in this group of people were as compelling as in the first two books. So I'll definitely read the next book in this series. I'm sure there's going to be another one, and I'll definitely read it. I'm kind of hoping she goes back to, like, a city or, like a more traditional missing person crime than these, like, survivalist things. Because the both, like, One Step Too Far and then Still See You Everywhere had a lot of, like, survivalist elements, too. And it's like a storm on, again, in an atoll, no cell service. And I don't know, like, that's just not my thing. Like, so, I thought it was fine. I thought it was an interesting, like, approach. But, now it's, like, two of the three. And I'm like, okay, so if Frankie's going to constantly be doing, like, these, like, survivalist things, then I'm probably going to be out. Because I liked more of, like, her working in a bar and getting to know, like, the people in the community kind of that we had in the first book. Then I read The Night Shift by Alex Finley, which I really enjoyed. I related to this a lot on a personal level. It's about, like, a crime that happens, and then, like, 10, 20 years later, another crime, and everything's kind of connected. And it's weird because, like, I can see why a lot of people would feel like, I mean, how are these connected? That seems like nonsense. But I found this just really compelling from, like, the first page. And I grew up in a small town where there were a couple major crimes, like, that involved people I knew. And in a small town, like, everybody's kind of connected to it. And so, like, I don't know. I think it really, like, resonated with me for that reason. And so, yeah, I mean, again, I think this was for me, it was just, like, personal. I also thought the writing was good, so, but I can understand why it may not be for everybody. Yeah. And then I'm going to move on to the books I really, really liked this month. So, my favorites of the month. So I had, one, this is Several People Are Typing. This book is very odd. It is a sort of sci-fi speculative fiction it's all told in Slack messages. But basically what happens is this group of people in this office, they're like an advertising firm. One of the people who works there, his consciousness gets trapped in Slack. And it's, like, very funny. But then also there's, like, this, like, serious sort of, like, existential, like, question kind of in there. There is a weird relationship So the consciousness, he and like one of his coworkers realize they have feelings for each other because like his coworker is now like taking care of his body, but then like the body is not his consciousness, so it's like, is that like non-consensual like sexual activity? I don't know. I mean, again, I don't think, it's meant to be something that you think that deeply about, but I think it's more just about like, being a little funny. So I tried not to like focus too much on that. But it is funny, and it's got like a lot of commentary about like capitalism and the American work culture and technology and our dependence on technology and how much of our humanity we have like kind of started to give away to like the technology in our lives. And so, but it was like really fun. And again, it's all told in Slack messages, so it reads really fast. If you do not use Slack ever at work, and like if you have never been like in an office environment like this, I don't know if it would be interesting. Like, and it's hard for me to say because like if like I use Slack all the time, and so like I don't know if it would be appealing to someone who has never used it and this isn't their like experience. So it's hard for me to like speak to. So like if you work in an environment that's not corporate and you don't kind of have this, like again, you don't use these tools, like you might be like, what is this book? So it's hard for me to say if it's niche or if it would be appealing beyond that, but I just thought it was really fun. I really enjoyed it. And it was so different and refreshingly like new that I was like, yay, something different. Then I read Sundial by Catriona Ward, which was not on my 24 for 24 Little Eviz, but I hadn't read this one either. And so I was like, okay. And I really liked it. It's not my favorite of Catriona Ward's. Like, I think right now, of the 4 I've read of hers, obviously Last House on Needless Street is like just a million miles above everything. And then I really like Looking Glass Sound. And then I'd probably put this above The Girl from Raw Blood, just because The Girl from Raw Blood was like almost a little too much like Frankenstein in the way that like it's like too graphic with like the science and the like animal dissection and stuff. So but this is a story about like a girl who a woman, and her daughter is showing signs of basically being like a psychopath or a sociopath. And she is kind of like, it goes back and forth between her currently with her daughter and then her growing up. And she grew up in this like compound, basically the science research compound. And there's not a whole lot I can say. The thing with Catriona Ward's books is you really can't say too much without it starting to just like give too much of the plot away. So, like anything, like her books, you just have to kind of go into them and be like, this is going to be a ride. And who knows where it's going to take me. It's a little more straightforward than Looking Glass Sound and Last House on Needless Street, but not a whole lot more. I mean, her writing is never going to be like straight and to the point. But what I love about her writing, even if like plot wise, like it was fine, like it was good, but like she just has a really compelling writing style. And I feel like it's just so comforting to me when I read her books. Like I'm just like, oh yes, this is as soon as I started reading it, I was like, oh, I'm back in like her warm, comforting words. And even though I say that, like her books are super twisted. So warm, comforting words and all these like horrible, dark things are happening. But she just, I think Jen or Jennifer, I don't know if she prefers Jen or Jennifer, at Fiction Addictions, I think she mentioned that Looking Glass Sound and Catriona Ward's writing felt like watching David Lynch movies. And I have to agree. And the thing is, like, I feel the same way about David Lynch movies, is that, like, I never really know what's going on in his movies, but I'm, like, so drawn to them. And then, like, even like, when we started watching the Twin Peaks Return, like, 2 seconds into the first episode, I'm just like, oh, it just feels so comforting to be back in this, like, in his head. And it's kind of odd to say that, because obviously his stuff is so weird and so wild, and hers is, like, dark and twisted and weird, but there's just something so compelling about it for me. And I can't really put my finger on it, but again, like, I can't explain why I love David Lynch's stuff either. It's just, it works for me. Like, I know it's meant to be sort of evocative and visceral, and that's what it is, and that's how I feel with, like, Catching on Ward's writing too. I'm just like, I don't know, it just works. So then the next one, and this is in my top 10 for the year so far, is Rebecca, by Daphne du Maurier, and obviously it's a classic. It's like, I mean, obviously it's gothic, it's got all of the gothic tropes, the writing is beautiful, it's fantastic, there's a whole, like, mystery, and you don't know what is going on. And then when you find out what's going on, it's so off the rails that it's just like part of me was like, what? And then the other part of me was like, yeah, I'm just going to go with it. Because it worked. Like, and it's so weird because I feel like if I read this story or saw this movie, like, in any other way or in any other context, I would just think it was absolute nonsense. And it is absolute nonsense. But it just works for me. And, like, I compared it to Wuthering Heights in my top 10. And the thing is, like, Wuthering Heights is the same way. Like, if you break down the story of Wuthering Heights, it's about terrible people doing terrible things to each other, just being overall terrible. And there's nothing necessarily, like, pleasant about it. But it just works. Like, the writing is so good, and the mood is so good, and it's like, you just can't help but, like, want to read it and be part of it. And that's how Rebecca was for me. Like, I was, like, there are so many points where I was just like, this is absolutely chaotic, and what is even going on, and why am I participating in this? And I just, it didn't even matter. I was just, like, so interested in what was going to happen next. And I wanted to get back to the book. And, like, that's the thing I always think tells you something, is, like, when you can't wait to get back to it. And I just couldn't, like, whenever I was doing something else, I was like, oh, I want to go read. And, I mean, I always want to go read, but, like, when the story wraps you up that much in it and you just get transported, I just think that's so great, and that's what I loved about it. So, but man, is it bonkers. And then the last one is The Secret History. This is my number 2 book of the year so far. Loved this, absolutely loved it. It's just, every page was just fantastic. It's dark, but it's super funny in, like, a very, very dark way. The writing is just fantastic. It's witty while also being dark and twisted, and the characters are awful. And they're, like, just so disgusting as people, but also, like, really interesting. And, like, you just kind of, like, I mean, you hate them, but you also are, like, you love to be around them, even though you're like, wow, they're just horrible people. And so, like, they're not, like, love to hate kind of characters. They're, like, you hate them but also love them. Like, and it's not that you feel bad for them or anything. You're just sort of like, I'm glad these characters were written. Like, I am just glad they exist, as twisted and horrible and unlikable as they are. I'm just happy to know that they're there. And I'm sorry, I'm coughing to death, and I could probably pause, but I'm not going to, so. But yeah, I just did a video on this, and I also did a video, this is my top 10, and I did a video comparing, well, not comparing, but kind of talking about Secret History and if we were villains, because I've loved both of those, and just dark academia in general. So I'm not going to say a ton more, but loved it, absolutely loved it. And so, yeah, so that was March, and then I'm doing the readathon right now, so I will have a lot in April, hopefully at least 20, because that's the goal for the readathon. So, all right, see you around. I will check. I think Sir Chonk read like one book this month. I think he read The Shards by Bret Easton Ellis, and he absolutely hated it, and I don't think he's read anything since, because I think he's been in like a bad mood since. But, yeah, so I'll see if maybe he'll pick up some more stuff in April, and then you can like do March and April together or whatever. But it's that time of year at school, though, where like he doesn't have as much reading time. So anyway, see you in a bit. Bye.